Welcome to Convince Me in 15 Minutes, where we give our guests 15 minutes to convince us about timely topics in the financial services industry. Before we begin, please subscribe below. The Convince Me in 15 Minutes podcast will introduce you to new concepts, theories, philosophies, and practices in the financial services industry. Your guides are Luke Tawas and Keith Thompson. We'll follow up the initial presentation with questions. So again, subscribe below and we'll introduce our guest speaker.
Hi, I'm Brooklin. I'm going to try to convince you in 15 minutes or less why living abroad as an expat or digital nomad is probably more realistic and attractive than you might think. I know we all hear a lot about digital nomads. It's like the hot new thing on, I was going to say Instagram, but now TikTok, traveling the world, working remotely, living your best life. Usually those influencers are young, single, attractive people who are just living their life and doing their own thing. They don't have kids. They don't have family back home. They're just kind of doing their thing. But my wife and I have lived abroad for almost 10 years now, down in Central America. And we can't really envision going back to the States. That's not to say anything negative about the States. It's just we've had a great run of 10 years here in Central America. And I don't know. I don't think enough people realize how feasible, realistic, and beneficial it can be to move abroad. It doesn't have to be for 10 years. We came initially for a year, and then we stayed for another year. And then we said, okay, one more year. And that was 3 years. And then now it's 10 years later. Both of our kids were born here, and we're probably here to stay. I think there's a few reasons this type of expat life works out well, and maybe we'll convince you to try it out for 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. First, the fun stuff on the personal side. The food's really cheap, really delicious, really plentiful. On both sides, for whether you want to cook or whether you're eating out. So cooking fresh produce is the cheapest I've seen it anywhere here in Central America. You can get big old avocados for about 40 cents instead of maybe $4. I don't know what it is in California these days. And then eating out. There's a ton of great restaurants, whether you want local, typical stuff, like a plate of rice and chicken and beans and salad will cost you maybe $3.50 on up to, there's lots of international stuff. Our favorite place is a ramen place where you can get a big old bowl of ramen for $8. So cheap food and groceries. Number two is the sense of community here. Maybe that sounds a little trite or cliche, but we experience like a real neighborhood with real neighbors here. Our girls go out and play with neighbor kids in the afternoons, just like you see in those old 80s, 90s, 2000s movies, right? Like kids actually being able to go out and play and then just come back when it gets dark. There's also very much a small town feel. You run into a lot of folks that you know when you're out and about, going to the bank, going to the grocery store, here in the co-working space. So it's fun to have this combination of an international experience with lots of folks coming from all over the place and a small town feel. And then last, on the personal side, housing is really, again, affordable and plentiful. You can get a small apartment for maybe $400 or $500 a month. You could get a big colonial house for maybe $1,200 to $1,500 a month, or you can do what we did. You can buy a townhouse, outfit it how you want it, and you have your what feels like a forever home for a fraction of what we've seen on Zillow in the States. Every time we think about moving back to the States, we talk ourselves out of it by going on Zillow for an hour or two, and then we think maybe we'll stay here with our paid off house. And then lastly, it just feels like a fantastic opportunity for our kids. They're in a great bilingual school. They're growing up speaking Spanish and English. They're meeting people who have lived a very different reality than them here locally in Guatemala, and people from all over the world coming and speaking German and Hebrew and Afrikaans and French. So they just get a lot of interactions that I don't know if they would in the States. And again, all of that's much more affordable. It doesn't all come back to money, but it's a nice side benefit is that activities, private school, trips with the kids all cost quite a bit less here. That's on the personal side. I think on the professional side, I've been able to meet a lot of interesting people who are coming here to work for a while. Editors, copywriters, business owners. There's a lot of entrepreneurs that come through. So it's just fun to meet people in a, again, kind of international place that feels like a small town. Yeah, I do want to talk about some of the potential, not cons, but things to be aware of if you are thinking about the change. Number one, just be prepared for things to take a long time. The things that you take for granted that you can do online or just on your smartphone in the States, you got to go in person and do that thing maybe 2 or 3 times to make it happen. So sometimes processes, government offices, registering your vehicle, buying property, getting a driver's license can just take a lot longer and take some patience. So be prepared for that. I'd also invest time in language learning with wherever you're moving. Depending on where you go, there's probably there could be a lot of English speakers, maybe not. Whether there are or not, I think it's always beneficial to take your first 3 to 6 months investing in learning the language and then trying to use it, because most folks will appreciate the effort and you get the benefit of trying to learn another language. It also can be a little bit of a mental load to have this split life between the US, where we have our business registered and family and all these things going on, and our life here in Central America. Just kind of a mental load to balance those two. I think that's probably more so if you already have property in the States that you're figuring out how to rent out, or you have a US based job. It can be some hoops to jump through. But it, again, does feel worth it to me. I think if I were to summarize why we decided to stay after our first year and why we're continuing to decide to stay, it would come down to support of our long-term goals. I think because of what we're able to sustain our lifestyle here at, we're able to build towards our longer-term goals for early retirement and solid investments and taking care of our kids' college and things like that, but maybe we wouldn't be able to if we were in the States. I think number 2 is a balance of life and work now. We're able to not feel the pressure of working 50, 60 hours a week. So the last couple of years, we've been able to take a step back, build boundaries for ourselves, and just kind of build a healthier work-life balance because of the lucky position we're in of having U.S. income, but living outside of the U.S. I talked about our kids and school. I think it's an opportunity for our kids to stay here and grow up being bilingual and meeting a lot of interesting people. That's the third reason we're here for.
Well, I will say for the first time we have a guest here where clearly Luke is probably better prepared to ask you questions. Luke is originally from Belgium. He actually sent his children to college in Belgium because for him, as a dual citizen, it was free. I did not have that opportunity here domestically and spent the gross national product of several third world nations to send my kids to school. So, obviously the school thing's a kind of a big deal. You kind of hit on the elementary side of the education. Let's assume you do stay there for the long haul and your children are going to go to college. What's the college situation like where you are?
Yeah, there's some universities here that are great. You can go on to, an international career. We do want to prep our kids for either European or US colleges. There's a couple of great international schools here. There's one called Antigua International School, very creatively named, but has a really solid program and graduates a ton of kids that go back or to the US for university. And then the school our kids are in is based off of, it's not Montessori, but it's pretty similar, and it goes all the way through high school. Once you get up to high school, it has more of a similarity with International Baccalaureate. So it's very project based, but it prepares you for university the same way.
Yeah, actually, Brooklyn. So I was born in Belgium, and then at the age of 9, my dad actually got a job in Curacao, which is about 90 miles north of Venezuela. And for 3 years, we lived there. And one of the things I remember, being introduced to certainly different cultures, different language, But what was amazing to me at the time was, so he was an accountant, and down in the basement, we had a room where essentially, I mean, it's bigger than this room. The fax was that big. I mean, it was like assembled inside of a room, and it was massive, reams of paper that had the side. I would imagine, 30 years later, technology is a heck of a lot easier to work abroad. From a technology standpoint, I mean, what are you utilizing to do business? I mean, is it just everything via email and then Zoom calls?
Yep. Email, Slack, and Zoom calls, just like everybody else. I think we were lucky that we realized what's possible with remote work pretty early. My wife and I freelanced for a long time, kind of out of necessity, because we couldn't work locally in Israel where we were previously or here in Guatemala. So we freelanced because you can do that anywhere and be flexible, right? So we started the same time we moved here. So we've been doing it about a decade. It's gotten much better the last few years since everybody else has treated it as the norm. And yeah, it's just Zoom, email, Slack. There's a great co-working space here. Most towns through not most international or expat or tourist towns will have a good co-working space to work out of. So we used that for a long time. And then we actually just I keep wanting to call it SpaceX because it's what it sounds like. We just got Starlink at home. So now we have, before the home internet was a little bit spotty. So we were here in the co-working space, but now we have really solid internet in the house as well for working from home.
I have to imagine that COVID was a complete non-event for you because you've already been effectively doing that for the past 7 years. Has it gotten actually easier for you since COVID?
Yeah, I think it's, from a work perspective, more of a non-event because it's what we were doing, just working in front of our laptop, on the couch. I think it has gotten easier in the sense that more people, there's less of a division now between personal and professional. And I think sometimes that can get cringy on LinkedIn or X or wherever, where it's like a little bit too much of an overlap. But overall, I think it's been a really positive shift in the right direction of people talking about work-life balance and their kids and working as a single parent and all these different things that come together. I think that's become a lot more normal the last it's been almost 4, is that right? Almost 4 years. So that's been really fun to see. It's led to some, I think, more genuine conversations and moments online.
In Brooklyn, what type of work do you and your wife do? And what other careers have you seen those that are successful working abroad accomplish?
We run a marketing agency. So when we freelanced, we were tech writers for all of that time. I worked on content marketing in-house for a couple of years, and we combined that to form this content marketing agency. What we see other people doing, there's a lot of designers and programmers. Some are full-time employed and they have an agreement with their employer, and some are freelance like we were. So we see it go both ways. Quite a few own some kind of business, tourism business here locally, something back in the States that they can run remotely like we do, or something in between where it's like import-export on coffee or textiles. So a lot of entrepreneurs in this space for sure.
So assuming I'm an old dog who wants to learn a new trick, and I've never operated outside the confines of the United States, understanding tax laws and understanding healthcare and understanding the banking system, that's got to be an onerous task to kind of wrap your head around all that stuff.
It's been a 10-year process wrapping my head around that. That's what I was trying to get at with that, like the combination of just be prepared for things taking a long time and the split attention span between the US and Guatemala. Like we don't have property in the States, but because we're US citizens, our taxes are and we run our own business, our tax situation is so, I don't even understand it. We pay our CPA, they walk us through it. I trust them and we move forward. Like I can't.
As a US citizen, taxes every year in the US?
Yeah, you have to file in most scenarios. I'm not a CPA, I can't give advice, but in most situations, you do not have to pay federal tax up to a certain threshold. I think this last year was $117,000 for a single person and close to double that for a couple. So you file taxes, but then depending on how much you make, probably the majority is excluded from federal tax. So you would, if you had made estimated payments, you would get it back as a refund, or you just wouldn't owe on the first 117,000 or so, which is a huge benefit. Again, going back to our financial goals, and now we're moving our tax residency out of California because we haven't lived there in 10 years. We're talking tens of thousands a year saved in taxes that we're able to put into our investment goals rather than a check for the IRS.
So let's assume I made $117,000. Can one live a nice lifestyle in Guatemala on $117,000?
Oh yeah, definitely. Our budget. This doesn't count the last month we did 3 months of international travel, so it doesn't count the international travel. But our monthly budget is about $6,000 for a family of 4, and we're in our own house. We have private school. We do the activities. We eat good food. Travel a good amount locally. Now I sound like I'm bragging, but I'm just trying to describe what you can at that median income level in the U.S. What you're able to do with it here is it goes much further.
Now, are you in an area that is populated by a lot of expats, or did you happen to be in an area and you've kind of found your expats in different pockets?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the first 5 years we lived here in Guatemala, we lived in a town called Huehuetenango, which did not have many expats. It was a great town, beautiful mountains all around it. We were originally living there to work with a nonprofit. After our daughters were born, we decided to move to Antigua, mostly for the schooling. The private school options are better here. Yeah, so this town was a conscious decision.
So Brooklyn, both of my boys were born here in the United States, but because I was a Belgian citizen, I was able to get them Belgian citizenship. So are you able to do the same thing where your children were born overseas, but because you're a U.S. citizen, you can still get them dual citizenship? So giving them the ability to come back if they choose to?
Yeah, so our oldest already has U.S. citizenship. She's our biological daughter, but she has Guatemalan citizenship because she was born here. Right. Our younger daughter we adopted here, so she has her visa to the U.S., but we're still working on her citizenship process. And so she'll have, again, dual citizenship for both. Although to your point earlier about university in Belgium, there's also an agreement with Spain where Guatemalans can get Spanish citizenship. So we're looking into that for our girls so that they at least have the option of going to university in Europe. We'll see.
So one of the questions that I've always gotten from people when I've had this conversation with them, and I think the irony is I live in Philadelphia, a town that probably doesn't have the best reputation for crime. But I think everybody's first thought when they think about moving overseas anywhere is, what's the crime like? How do you navigate that system? Everybody's worried that if you get arrested for something that, you're just going to rot in jail forever. What can you share in terms of assuaging some of those fears?
Hopefully a balanced view. So some of the concerns are legit. I mean, we have friends of friends of friends, like stories where, something happens, they get arrested, and you're in Guatemalan jail for multiple years while you sort it out. So I get some of the concern. In terms of actual safety, we haven't run into anything that's given us major pause. I think there's spots in pretty much any U.S. city that you would say, I'm going to avoid that. Or at least at midnight, I'm not going to walk down this street. Similar here around Antigua, and especially in the capital city. There's some areas to stay away from. There's some things to be aware of, but it's just using your best judgment and common sense, honestly, and overall feels very safe for a family.
But I mean, you can't just book an airplane ticket and just go anywhere you want in the world. I mean, for example, I know, because I'm a Belgian citizen, I can go to Belgium for a year, but my wife couldn't. I mean, there are limitations on how long a U.S. person can stay in Europe, as an example. I think it's 6 months out of the year. I think 3 months at a time. So, I mean, aren't there limitations in your country as well?
Yeah, and you're right. Most countries do. So do your homework ahead of time. Guatemala is similar to Europe. You can stay for 90 days at a time, and then you have to leave the country for at least 3 days, and then you can come back for an additional 90 in a 1 year window.
Yeah.
A lot of what I hear is similar to that. So it's just swallowing the 3 or 4 day trip as a chance to take a vacation, or looking into what residency looks like. So we have residency here because our daughters were born here. It can be difficult. It took us 3 years to get residency, but it was worth it for the stability for us. Otherwise, you can kind of come in on a swinging door basis every 90 days.
But then you're paying rent in both places and you're not really saving the money that...
Well, that's where the digital nomad part comes in. Like you can go to Europe for 90 days, come to Central America for 6 months, go back to Europe for 3 months. Like it's different of whether you want expat life or digital nomad life. But there's people here who have lived here for 5+ years, and they just either renew or leave every 90 days to deal with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of amazing, looking at ticket prices, and as an example, for me to go to Paris, can be $1,000 to $2,000 depending on when I want to go. But yet, if you go from Paris here to Houston and back, you're talking about $500. So it's kind of amazing how a lot of times, because the U.S. has so much wealth, that we subsidize the airline tickets for those that can't afford it the other direction, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's like international travel. When you start looking at booking tickets, there's a lot of interesting things there. It's almost like here in the United States, looking at the U-Haul measure. A truck from California to Texas costs, I think, 3 times as much than a U-Haul truck from Texas back to California. But anyway, it's
to that
sure there's
point,
a lot of interesting things like that.
It seems to me that your job with the nonprofit took you to Guatemala, and then you decided to stay. If you had advice for people that don't have that kind of situation, who are saying, look, I just want to give this a run, what kind of research would you do? Are there any websites that you would recommend to do some research on where it might be a good landing spot?
Yeah, this might sound old-fashioned in 2024 for the young folks using TikTok and Telegram and who knows what else. But honestly, the 2 best resources I've found, not just for here, Guatemala, but pretty much any town I've seen, has a group dedicated to that town or country for expats and digital nomads, is Facebook groups and Reddit. So we're in a few different expat Facebook groups here locally, and it's just a great resource for the complicated paperwork you were asking about earlier, Keith, for finance questions like you were asking about, Luke, for like updates, what's coming up. And then there's a good amount of folks coming in saying, hey, I'm coming for 3 months. I have this specific question about XYZ before they get to the country. And people are super happy to jump in and help out. And I've seen that anywhere I've gone. Like we were in Europe this last summer, and Lisbon and Tromso, Madrid, they all had similar communities on Reddit and Facebook. Seen it all the way through Central America. So I'd search for Facebook groups, not pages, but groups, and subreddits.
So invariably, when you're away like you are, family gets involved. How does that work? I mean, there's always dynamics with everybody's individual family, and being far away, heck, being in New Jersey versus Pennsylvania is problematic sometimes with my family. So, what advice do you have there?
We encourage them to visit when they can, so that's always fun to share with them. And then, we make time to go back about once a year to visit. So it's honestly about the same as if we lived across the country, right?
Right.
I flew to a wedding. Where was it? I think Austin, or flew into something. Yeah, I flew into something either in Austin or Atlanta, and people were like, oh, you're coming from Guatemala. Wow, it sounds so far away. But the flight from Guatemala to Austin is shorter than the flight from Seattle to Austin or Portland to Austin, right? So if you're in Southeast Asia or somewhere like that, it's going to be a bigger thing because it takes longer to travel back and forth. But that's one of the reasons we like Central America. It's on the same time zone. It's easy to get back to and from, short flights, all of that makes it easier for friends and family.
Well, I will say, look, this has been a topic I've always been interested in. I've been saying to my wife for years, I've always Googled, what are the best places for expat? Everything I've seen said Malta. Sorry, Guatemala didn't come up as number one choice. But she thinks I'd be a lunatic if we did that. So I certainly appreciate the voice of somebody who's done it, who has realized it's not a lunatic that takes the impetus to do something like this. So I can't thank you enough for joining us today. It's been very informative. Luke, do you have any other parting questions? No, I just can't thank you enough for your time, Brooklyn. I think this has been, the wheels in my mind are turning. So it's, really appreciate you joining us. And if somebody wants to find any additional information, is there something that you'd like to share about your own company or your own business, or, kind of what you do? Is that beneficial to share here?
Sure. Why not? Feel free to get in touch. Yeah, I'm always open to DMs and networking calls on Zoom. Also, I have a standing invitation to anybody who comes to Antigua in Guatemala. I'll buy you lunch, can show you the co-working space. So feel free to DM me on LinkedIn, probably is your best bet. And I'll respond there. We run Beam Content, which is a content marketing agency for B2B SaaS companies. So you can check the team out there too, but I'd be happy to hear from you.